This is Roland Titan, guy divided or blah. This is Roland Titan, the guy designing Titan's Battalion at 2 in the morning on the 20th of April 2024. I'm also the guy making allchess.com eventually. But right now I want to talk about our game. So, small context, we are a multi-army chess variant that focuses on traditional armies and a few new ones. We have a severe emphasis on balance. I've been working on this for a decade, and many of my days have been entirely consumed by this game. Probably years of my life at this point. Okay, so I want to talk about first, and this is my third time trying to record this today, but the first one was a 4-hour discussion session with a man who, quite frankly, is going to get me canceled if I just release the whole thing, because that's just how he is. He's hilarious, don't get me wrong, but damn. Alright. So how Xiangqi currently works in our game, so I'll be showing against chess for posterity's sake, is... Fine, I'll turn on Force Westernize so you guys can see more easily. Yeah, that will help our audience better. Xiangqi in its current rule set works as follows. Between the 5th rank and the 6th rank, from the Xiangqi territory's perspective, is the river. The river divides these two ranks. On the Xiangqi side of the river, Xiangqi rules apply for the most part. On the chess side of the river, chess rules apply for the most part. Now, what does that mean? What that means is, other than just how these pieces work, I do expect you to know how Xiangqi, Shogi, and Zhanggi work for this video. You got it. Anyways... On this side of the river, if you are moving there, knights are lamed, as in the way the horse works. So they move through this square first to get to here. They don't jump. That means they still go to this square, but if this piece is here, they cannot go there because it's blocked. Okay. Knights have that when they're going to that side. Horses do not have that anymore when they're going to this side, right? So effectively the same piece, they just start on opposite sides, and that changes. That actually does make one stronger than the other. We don't know which, because this one starts stronger, but this one starts weaker. But if this one is on this side, then it can only be attacked through Xiangqi ways, but it is attacking through chess ways, and vice versa. If this one is on this side, it can be blocked here to get to this square, right? But this one cannot be blocked to attack here. So there are pros and cons. Okay. Turns out diagonals completely break Xiangqi. So what did we say? You can't kill with a diagonal on the Xiangqi side of the river. But the pieces that lost that, so pawn, bishop, queen, king, now, if they didn't already, so not queen and king, can capture one square forward instead. So the pawn now moves and captures one square forward, and the bishop does bishop things and only captures on the single square in front of it on that side of the river. So a pawn here is not targeting these two squares, it's targeting this, but a pawn here is targeting both of these. Okay. And then that has follow-on consequences. What else did we do other than giving Xiangqi a domain expansion? We gave it a gun. It can shoot pawns at the start of the game. Okay. Which means it can kill one pawn after placement. And that makes Xiangqi better able to infiltrate the enemy army, which that mutual infiltration is supposed to happen in Xiangqi is a big part of the game. So, for example, a queen here, if it did have a diagonal, it would checkmate the king, because nothing is protecting this square, because the elephant is currently blocking it. So if you could just teleport the queen here, if it was chess rules, it's checkmate, but it is not, because it is Xiangqi rules. Yay! In fact, there's nowhere you could teleport the queen as checkmate under Xiangqi rules, because these aren't check, and these two are both protected by the guards and the elephant. That's very important. These 5 pieces are what we call the king nexus. So these pieces protect the king's orthogonals, because there isn't a diagonal attacking piece in Xiangqi. The king moves 1 square orthogonally and cannot leave this 3x3 area. That's incredibly weak. These pieces have limits on where they can go. They are supposed to stay by the king. They are not attacking pieces. These pieces are the rest of the defense of the king. So that's just how it works. But they can't defend a diagonal, so diagonals don't apply. Also, there's all kinds of nasty forks that could happen if that wasn't a thing. For example, if this isn't here, that's a dead rook. That could be a dead rook, etc. We have the cannons start loading, because otherwise they would be able to kill the rook at the start of the game, so they can't capture outside of the Xiangqi territory. Alright, hopefully I've explained how Xiangqi works well enough for new players to understand what I'm talking about for the rest of the video. How long did that take? 6 minutes. Damn it. I mean, I explained it more thoroughly than last time. It was 5 last time. Okay. So these pieces over here are the reinforcements. Now currently they are Sarawon gated in, which is the rule from Sarawon chess. As in, when you move something off the back rank, it's dropped there. The difference that we have from Sarawon is even if you move that piece multiple times, so say you move it out, then you move it back, then you move it out again, you can still gate that piece in. This piece is a rook to 4. It is weaker in order to be a balanced style we can tune, as well as affect Xiangqi game feel properly. Okay. Problems with this. This material actually hurts Xiangqi game feel, especially the horse. So one of the things that you want to do is rank or file your chariot when you drop this, or when you move this horse. So you want one of them to be filed, which means affecting this way, and the other one to go this way. And you want to do at least one of those in the first 4 moves of the game. Those are like Xiangqi proverbs and development theory, right? But if it is optimal for you to need this guy to be protected, or need this guy to be protected, you may gate one of these in. And if you have to gate the horse in, because, you know, the horses are the pieces you most commonly want to develop off the back rank, and putting a piece in the corner sucks, you're either going to drop it here, here, or here, right? Because you're going to move a guard, an elephant, or a horse early and put these pieces in. And if you do it with an elephant, the horse ends up in an unnatural position and affects an unnatural square, which is a good thing for balance, but a poor thing for Xiangqi game feel, which has such a strict regiment about what you are supposed to do and how you are supposed to do it. Okay, but if you gate in something like a rook, the rook naturally, in 2 moves, can get to any of these files and therefore affect any square on the board, relatively speaking, to the pawn line. So if it gets behind the cannon, it is supporting the cannon to move forward and protect it. If it gets behind one of these soldiers, it can, in 2 turns, protect any soldier, even if it is advancing. And in 2 turns, it can get to these open files and target down this way. By the same token, this shorter range rook, in 2 turns, for the open file example, could 1, gate in, 2, and be affecting this these squares, right? 1, 2, 1, 2. So you aren't doing anything that you can't already do in Xiangqi with this rook piece. Because it's shorter range, you also aren't gaining extra tempo in the opening, which, due to the strength of the cannons, is very important. And you're just going to have to take my word for it, because I'm not going to fully walk through everything about this army right now. Okay. Second con about this version of the army. Opening salvo is an extra point of friction. So the way we want this to work, player going second picks board, or battlefield, right? And that is down. So you can view it as this is the board you start with. This one is T2, 10 by 2, boom. And there's other options, of course, which affects openings, but the player going second picks it. Both players pick armies blind. They show, probably by writing it down, talking to a judge, etc., what army they chose, and then you play. Play starts with player 1 placing their board and setting up their pieces, and player 2 placing their board and setting up their pieces. Now, normally, with any other army, this would now be when white makes the first move. But because salvo is here, this is the moment you delete something. You have to delete something. Okay. And that extra bit means there's an actually moment. And this is going to be a recurring theme in this video of something I want to avoid. Actually moments are moments where things work differently than the player expects from previous experiences in the game, and then either the person they are playing or a judge has to come talk to them and explain why it's different if it's their first time. These can be explained relatively easily, for the most part, and only really have to be explained once, but every single player has a threshold for how many of these can happen before they aren't interested in the game at all. So, an example is en passant. It happens, it confuses players, you could tell them to Google it, you can explain it to them, whatever. But it does matter. Or castling, if you explain it, and if you explain it poorly, they may try to castle out of, into, or through check. Probably not into. And then you have to explain to them that they can't do that. And then they may believe you, they may not, depending on whether or not you are a point of authority where you're teaching, or you're someone else who's learning the game at the same time, and you knew the rule and they didn't, etc. Right? The more these a game has, the more likely you are to hit a player's actually threshold where they're like, I'm done, I don't want to learn this game anymore, I'm tired of it, how could I have possibly known that, etc. And giving the players shortcuts where they can expect things a certain way the first time they play, and not hit them with too many actually moments without also giving them a, oh, that's cool moment, is important. And certain types of cerebral players will think that this is interesting, because they now have to go, oh, which of my pawns is my opponent going to delete? Are they going to kill one by my queen in order to maybe weaken my king safety in the opening? Honestly, no. They should absolutely not kill one that opens, in this case your dark square bishop, so whichever one is on the same color as the enemy king, or the queen. Now you may ask, why that bishop? That's the competent bishop, because it can target these 4 squares, or these 6 squares, which are legitimately weak in the Xiangqi position. These 8, right? Meanwhile, the other one can't even get through these soldiers in the first part, and if they do, they get to squares that are relatively well protected in the Xiangqi position. You know what I'm saying? Like, these squares, less so these 2, but they can't even get through these, are relatively well protected in the Xiangqi position. So this bishop is weaker. Okay. Just side tangent. Something to know. So that's a bad thing about salvo. It creates those moments, and it's an extra step in the game field. And it doesn't matter whether or not Xiangqi is going first or second, they get the first action of the game. And that's another problem with this. If they're going second, they pop it. If they're going first, they pop a pawn and then they move, right? So they either get 2 turns, 2 actions in a row. One of them is always guaranteed to be this, or even though they're going second, they get the first one, right? Which means, kind of, for player psychology, Xiangqi always goes first in their matchups with Salvo in the opening. And if they are going first already, they go first twice. Not good. So, how can we fix those things? We want to reduce the number of reinforcements, and we want to remove that game feel point. So the idea was, what if Salvo cost a turn? You can't do it in the opening, and therefore you can have more of them. Because the problem with Salvo here, at the start, is if you let your opponent salvo 2 or even 3 pawns, they're getting several actions at once at the beginning, so it makes the second problem I mentioned worse. Additionally, Xiangqi doesn't even want that many salvos, because killing these ones is really bad for you. Not always, but it can be. You have to be very careful. Hell, killing these ones is very bad for you for rook development reasons. Sometimes, not always. At least in this position, killing this pawn would literally just hang a cannon on move 1. There isn't any tactic for follow-up. You just give up a cannon if you kill this, going second as Xiangqi. So you can't kill that one. If you kill this one, there's maybe things that you should have rethought about your life when the queen goes here on turn 1, and you can no longer make a ranked chariot. Because if you do, it dies to the enemy queen. So you're literally stopping things because you got rid of this one. Oh, you kill this one, queen goes here, it's targeting your cannon. That sucks. Or same type of idea. Or the same type of idea, right? Slower, but still matters. You kill this one or this one, and all of a sudden you have to worry about the bishop going here and harassing your cannons, and then maybe even with some support, harassing the guard, especially if the support is here. Okay, so Xiangqi doesn't even want to kill all of these pawns. They are giving their opponent free tempo with long-range powerful pieces if they do. So we have to use a reinforcement instead of salvo. Unless it costs a turn and you can do it later and you can choose when to do it. Problems, and just purely an endgame consideration, if you can kill a pawn anywhere, you can kill a pawn on the second to last rank before it promotes. Just for free. As a turn. That feels bad even if it's balanced. And really sucks because your opponent really invested in that pawn. He moved it at minimum 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and then you just blew it up. That's not good game feel. Okay. So, what if salvo only here? And technically here too, but doesn't really matter. So here or further back. As a turn, later. Okay. And then how many to do? No horse, because, you know, the shorter range chariot is fine. But we'll do that. 3 salvo, as a turn later. We did a game feel test. It turned out it didn't feel terrible. So we did a balance test. Here's that balance test. I'm going to only show the highlights, and I'm mostly going to click through the game quickly. I'm not going to explain everything we did because I don't want this to be, I'm already 20 minutes in, another hour, 2 hour, 3 hour video. So, Xiangqi place, chess place, Move 1 happens. Chess goes here. Xiangqi pushes another pawn with intentions to maybe blow up this, move these guys to the center, and do terrible things to the enemy king. Chess currently owes a move in order to defend this rook from this cannon once loading is over, but I digress. Xiangqi goes here because if you take, they can take back, and if you move to the center, they can just move out of the way, something like this. This is still reasonable, but probably not the best. This is probably where it would end up. Okay. Try to go tempo here. Chess goes there. Opening is popped open a bit. Loading ended, so we needed to defend the rook, so we couldn't recapture that. This goes here. So it wasn't really a loss because, you know, this soldier died in order for this one to kill a pawn. You re-attack the guy. And some other development things happen. Rook infiltrates, mate is threatened. Notable moment where, in order to avoid this from being deflected and this dying, this is here in order to defend mate. And that was a reinforcement tempo moment, which will matter later. First salvo happens. Bunch of trades. For balance tests, we artificially raise our ELO by allowing takebacks and full discussion of all moves. The process usually takes several hours of me and another player going back and forth in order to try to make the game the highest quality possible. Luckily, we have tons of time to go through tons of lines and ideas. And even, like, if our reading fails us a little bit, we can play it out, look at it, go back, play it out, look at it, go back, etc. Okay. Notable moment. There's only one pawn left here. This pawn move effectively captured a salvo. So now, Xiangqi, through the opening, has missed their chance to salvo all three. They only salvoed one so far. And they capture the other one normally because it also pins the knight. So they did win pawns in the opening anyway because they used the turns that they would normally salvo for the rook to infiltrate and capture on the 7th and then the rook to capture here. So materially they didn't lose anything. Because that's just how it played out this game. But there are scenarios where you would not, under this rule set, get all three off, and it would be because you missed an opportunity earlier in the game, and it may cost you an end game because that extra pawn may promote because of the board geometry and piece setup, right? Okay. Then we play it out for a while. There's a bunch of crazy trades. We end up in this endgame. Funny moment. Check, check, check. Bam. The last pawn is dead. No promotions can happen. Yes, we gave Xiangqi pawn promotions because we had to. Because otherwise they don't have anything to play for in the endgame. And this is a drawn endgame. And it would be a drawn endgame thanks to 4 wins, even without that cannon and elephant there. Okay. Conclusion about the salvo? Yeah, it's... We remove the horse game feel issue of dropping it in weird places, and we remove the other game feel issue, and we bring the army closer to the way Couch Tomato wants it, where we have no reinforcements. We can't quite get there, barely, but I think we only need one reinforcement. One relatively weak reinforcement that doesn't let you do anything you can't normally in Xiangqi, technically. And it opens up the enemy army so that you can do more Xiangqi things. Some cons. Something that came up in that game, if I just go back to the early opening. If chess castles say about here, you've now committed to a side, and all 3 of these salvo say these pawns, 2 of them don't exist, and 1 of them will get to move. Probably this one can't move. 1 of these will move, and the other one will die, and then this king is completely exposed, and more than likely you get mated. It's very dangerous. So you can't commit to a side yet until your opponent commits more salvo. And then you get to keep another pawn by the king and be a little bit safer. Luckily, the opponent can't attack you diagonally, so you really only need 1 or 2 pawns in front of the king. And you can choose which one it is by committing 1 square, and if you can get away with it, commit another 2 and then move it over while it's protected, thanks to battlefield movements, which I've explained in previous videos and will explain in future videos. But basically, you can't castle until your opponent commits to an attack or it uses at least 1 of their salvos. That's the gist of it. That's a downside in some ways, but as long as we can balance around it and it's not an instant mate for Xiangqi, it's kind of fine. But it is a tactical consideration where if you do normal chess stuff and you castle early, you will lose to Xiangqi. And that's another thing where if we do not have... so, in the online version of this game, if we do not have an engine and an engine analysis for the game after, people will not understand why they lost. And that assumes we engine balanced it as well. So the engine will start, say it's even, and they'll go, okay, especially if we make it look as much like the Stockfish one as possible, and be as close in strength as we can get, as strong as we can make it, and still not, break the bank. We're not dedicating fucking cloud computing to all of your fucking games. You can analyze locally. It'll be okay. As long as we make it be credible and look credible, people will be able to realize what they did wrong instead of blaming the balance of the game, especially with all of this extra testing and discussion that we're doing, actually going through and working through these mechanics like I'm doing with you right now. So, this means most of the time castling early is a blunder. And the AI telling them that will help, but it won't help the first time. It's a learning moment. And there's all sorts of these that will come up. Like realizing that this bishop is the competent one and this bishop sucks. That's another one that happens with Xiangqi. Okay. That's a con, kind of. But it's one where we can balance around it, and it's just an interesting fact about the game in this matchup. Okay. Anything else really to note from this balance test? Anything else I need to point out? No, not really. So we are going to implement this salvo change. There is another change that we've been looking at today. And to talk about it, it has to do with reinforcements. So, Xiangqi itself is a very regimented game. Now, its counterpart, one of the other of the 10 armies in the game, is Xiangqi, his Morning Calm, as we call it. And that's the Korean chess variant rather than the Chinese one, like Xiangqi. And despite looking similar, you are looking at it right now, we don't have the piece assets yet. The Xiangqi pieces are octagons. Just a moment. May as well show you what Xiangqi actually looks, or Xiangqi actually looks like. Yeah. So rather than being circles, they are octagons. And they also have different sizes, while Xiangqi has set sizes, right? And, oh, look, really old Xiangqi sets. It also plays very differently. So, while Xiangqi is all about very regimented defenses, mutual infiltration, very hard to stop anything, the pawns only move forward, you will get in on an open file because there are 4 at the start of the game, and stuff like that. Very often, pawns don't matter because somebody's just going to die. That's Xiangqi. Xiangqi, on the other hand, is all about your moves having trade-offs. You have to commit to open and close your own lines. So the cannons, they still load, but the cannons do not move unless they jump over a piece. So you have to open their line by putting something in the way. Xiangqi is also flexible on where you can put stuff layout-wise. So a horse can start here, here, and be fine. And traditional Xiangqi sometimes lets you move all 3 of these around, depending on the source, but usually just lets you potentially put the rook here, and then the elephant here, and the horse stays exactly right here, right? But you can always choose for these whether or not your horses start on the left, the right, both on the outside, both on the inside. And they're named conventionally off of the position of the elephants. So this starting formation for black here would be right elephants. You could also have outer elephants, inner elephants, left elephants, right? And most commonly, the players pick either right or left, rather than both outer or both inner. Why? Flexibility. So, because the elephant is different in Xiangqi, it moves first 1 orthogonal and then 2 diagonal. So same thing as the horse, but going a square further. Having an elephant here in the quote-unquote natural position from a Xiangqi player's perspective lets you defend the central pawn. Additionally, the pawns start promoted. They already are as if they had crossed the river in Xiangqi. They can move sideways. Cannons must jump to move and capture. What the game feel differences mean is this army can handle facing diagonals, and it can handle facing leapers, first of all. So it doesn't need the arbitrary, quote-unquote, rules of 4 winds and laming/leaping. And furthermore, the additional reinforcements that they get in exchange do not feel out of place in Xiangqi, because no matter where you put the horse, it's a place it kind of feels like it could go naturally. And you're already doing things that feel Xiangqi-like when you are putting the reinforcement in play, and I will show why. So, for example, if you do a ranked chariot, in order for it to have access all the way, you have to open its line by moving the king. The king starts forward, and that is deliberate so that you can't immediately stack them on this file or this file in 2 moves. It requires the third one. You need to open up your line. And if you, for example, bring your elephant all the way out in order to target these squares, you are closing off the ability for your horse to go to these 2, or even support this. And furthermore, you are closing off the ability for these guys to hold hands. Now sure, this one is protected, but this one is not, and this one is not. And therefore, your soldiers need to move sideways to defend at some point in the opening, usually. Moving a soldier to the side opens the cannon line. Moving the horse here opens the cannon lines to this side or this side, but cannons cannot leap each other. So if, for example, you open the cannon line here, and then jump later with the cannon to here, what you've actually done is closed this cannon line. So it's all about the pros and cons. If you want the horse fully activated, you can't move the elephant immediately, but moving the elephant immediately opens its lines to this square. Okay, so it's all about opening and closing your own lines. They're blockable on purpose. They stop themselves on purpose, and that's the trade-off. Now, let's look at that in the context of also doing gating. When you gate something in, when you reinforce, you open a new line for the new piece. Okay. And that new piece, wherever it is probably in a relatively natural square where its lines matter. So this would also be opening the reinforcement's line this way. Right? While also opening this. And similar types of things come up. Here's another example. And I'm actually going to gate in the elephant on this example. And I'm not messing with the chess side because I just want to show how the Xiangqi army interacts with itself. You have two options here to try to protect this unprotected soldier. Or three options, really. 4. You can move either of these in, or you can move this one to either side. If you move it to either side, you open the horse to go to these, right? And if the horse goes to theirs, it will open the elephant to be able to get to that square. But the horse moving would also close this cannon to get to these squares. Okay? Now, if you move this to the side, you are also committing to these two holding hands. So you're making it much harder for you to open this horse, and therefore to open this elephant, unless this elephant moves, because this elephant has now been opened. Additionally, moving this guy over opens this elephant to go to these two. So you've opened one thing, you've closed another. And all of the interactions that have happened because of this reinforcement are still natural Xiangqi things of open one thing, close another, open one thing, close another. Okay. 0 game feel issues. But there's a problem. What I've described so far is only how backline reinforcements work. We base it off of Sarah 1 gating. Frontline reinforcements do not feel proper if you can do this. This is not something that happens normally in Xiangqi. And is not something that should happen. In fact, this type of thing where there was 2 pawns and you push it forward and there's suddenly another behind does not exist in any base game in Titan's Battalion and should not exist. Sure, pawns end up stacked sometimes, and some armies, particularly the Berlina pawns, do it on purpose. But no army moves a pawn and didn't commit the pawn, right? Because that's the thing. You both created the pawn here and you didn't commit it. This type of move should be committal, but it's not if you can gate. But if you drop this soldier here, the pawns being here is relatively natural. And that's how it works in Sino chess, which Discord user Couch Tomato, the guy who he engine balanced it using Fairy Stockfish. It is supposed to emulate the game feel of Xiangqi versus the chess army. It was forced to do a lot of Xiangqi type things, including these soldiers, to do so. And in addition, you could play it on pychess.org. It kept things open by keeping the starting soldier count low, but it was able to reinforce and defend because they didn't have enough pawns by, as a turn later, dropping on the 4th rank on the front line as a turn their soldiers. We're doing the same thing here because it doesn't break game feel. Soldiers holding hands is normal. If you push it, it's still committal. You can move it back here as a turn, but that's just doing something you could normally do a little bit faster. You could still move this over twice and get to the same area. Okay, decent bit faster. not so fast that it's, bam bam, and then you've effectively only gained tempo, lost nothing type deal. But now we have two different rules for reinforcements, one for frontline, one for backline. And that is another actually moment. That is another thing where someone's going to be confused. Especially because more than likely, Xiangqi, and because there's only 3 of the 10 armies that even have reinforcements, and they probably want to work the same across all 3. But Xiangqi, at least, doesn't have a good way to do frontline reinforcements at all, so we do salvo instead. That's one of the reasons salvo exists, is because if you start adding pawns, especially to the open areas of a Xiangqi layout, it no longer feels like Xiangqi. You are blocking something that should be open. And furthermore, if you are able to support that pawn when you push it with another pawn, it doesn't actually have the Xiangqi interactions of basically pawns are supposed to hang sometimes if you're playing Xiangqi in the opening in exchange for some kind of tempo advantage, right? You lose the material for tempo advantage, and your opponent capturing it is often a mistake. Not always, but often. Okay. So we can't do frontline in Xiangqi. And Shogi already has Nifu, which, if you're not familiar, 2 pawns being on the same column in Shogi means you lost the game because you did something illegal. And if you do something illegal in Shogi, you are dishonored and you lose. Small jest. It's also just considered an insult to the game to try to take things back. You made a commitment, you have to live with it, and it's supposed to be a lesson that's taught through the philosophy of Shogi. What you do, you have to live with, right? Anyways. But Nifu means that you can't really do frontline reinforcements easily anyways. We still can, because if a pawn goes away, like that column is open because it's been captured, dropping one there doesn't feel anti-Shogi at all. In fact, dropping one as a turn on that spot kind of just feels like something you could normally do. It's just more conditional than Shogi. You're not as free, right? So it's fine. Okay. But we're probably not going to use it for Shogi because there's very little reason to. And we're definitely not going to use it for Xiangqi. So that means this one army has different reinforcement rules. Probably. And maybe 2. But the other one, it won't come up very much. Shit. We have an actually moment. And it doesn't need to be there. It did used to need to be there. Because we can't have it be gating up here. And we couldn't have it be drop as a turn, like the front line is, back here. So, what changes if it's no longer gating? For Xiangqi, if we scroll back up, very little. If we go to the exact point, it did matter this game, but only insofar as the tempo. It just meant you couldn't infiltrate yet, and you owed a move or 2 earlier in order to properly defend from this threat. Potentially, you could also do something like this and then this and just block it entirely. So here, because you want to rank this chariot anyway while this guy's filed, and now when this goes here, you block here. That's the difference. Meanwhile, in the game, they took advantage of the extra tempo to kill this pawn, but they could have killed a pawn anyway. It's just that they ended up winning more pawns, but they didn't also use all of their salvos. So materially, they didn't gain anything. They just gained 1 turn of tempo by being able to do it this way, which means it's technically weaker, But we can balance around that. We can balance around losing 1 turn of tempo in Xiangqi. Okay. We can balance around losing 1 turn of tempo in Xiangqi. And furthermore, sometimes you gain tempo. Because before you couldn't drop this guy here, you had to do it when you moved something, and in this case you chose to move the elephant. But sometimes you drop it on the open one, and you just end up helping support and attack that file. Okay. And that means that you get some drop tactics. So sometimes you'll win tempo when you drop on an open square, which means it's not even a full turn guaranteed of tempo loss. It's less than a turn of difference. But in old Xiangqi, the army was so open and so vulnerable, especially down these diagonals, and with horses literally jumping over your pieces and getting in for the attack, that if you start the game with enough reinforcements to equalize materially, it's a lot like having a ton of pieces in hand in shogi and being about to die via checkmate. The opponent, with all of their stuff, is going to kill you before you can play all of the turns required to get the stuff. Especially since, and for game feel reasons, it's back rank only. And that back rank starts full. So you owe not only the turn to develop, but the turn to drop for every reinforcement you need to be balanced. In Xiangqi, that's kind of fine. The soldiers can hold the line. In fact, they, even if you just do this is dumb, you shouldn't do this because you're actually harming your stuff. Drop some soldiers, move stuff in. You are covering with mutual defense every single pawn defended by pawns. 16 of the 18 squares in this little rectangle. With open rook files, and you've opened your cannons. Sure, your horses and elephants will not be able to play the game yet, but you can open them by pushing a pawn forward, and maybe, just maybe, when you're messing around with these, so for example, horse here, open the elephant here, and then you do something like this, maybe this guy dies, probably not. But if he does, you push to here and is now supported by this and opens the elephant, and you had a point and moment when when this was here, to also open new lines for your cannon, you're still able to play the game. And it's very hard for your opponent to break through. They owe the time it takes to get the pawns to infiltrate, and then trade off with your incredibly powerful pawn line. These are the strongest pawns in the game, straight up. They start the game able to move sideways, capture forwards, capture sideways, move forwards. They do everything you would ever want a pawn piece to do, and then some. These are beefy boys. They are worth at least 2 pawns, and they still promote. So probably, arguably, this piece might be worth more than this horse. Arguably. Because it promotes, and the horse doesn't. And this guy can cover 2 bishop squares really easily, or 2 knight squares really easily. Something like this, and you're covering both of these knight squares, and you're even threatening to push forward and kick it around, while also targeting 2 squares the bishop could get to. The horse has more trouble targeting that many squares of enemy miners than the soldier does, but it has more total squares of attack, so it's able to do things. And then in an end game, it kind of promotes with a few enough pieces on the board that can block it, or that can't block it anymore, so it's just a knight, because if there's no pieces in the way, you don't need to jump. Okay. So Xiangqi's fine. It has endgame issues, maybe. It has tempo issues, maybe. But nothing it can't handle. If it needs 5 turns to drop all of its reinforcements, it can do some of those as bolstering moves, and the opponent owes enough time for them to drop the other 3 and develop the other pieces in order to give them spots to drop another couple pieces, you know. Here maybe. Just because it feels interesting. I feel like this is wrong, that you would want, if you did things this way, the horses to be holding hands and this elephant to be supported again. Yeah, I would do it that way. After all, this elephant is already supporting this, so you don't need this one doing it through a closed line from this horse, right? And these two holding hands is incredibly stable, much like this is. Oh, by the way, just this and then all 9 of these squares are protected as well, so you're probably not getting mated. If they attack down a diagonal line, these two will hold hands this way, and they had to bust this open with pawns anyhow. So Morning Calm is kind of just up material a little bit at the start of the game anyway, but in end games they lose out. In end games they lose out because the pawns trade for these, and that is just straight neg on material, because these are much stronger than these, but you can't avoid that trade. Huh. You could try. You could try to lock the enemy pawn structure with these here, but you actually have a decent amount of trouble protecting all of your guys if they extend. These only really work because they defend each other. If they push too far forward without a friend right next to them, they aren't able to defend properly. And then a single pawn attacking a pair, like a pawn here or something, you're only targeting it once rather than twice. So it's going to trade. You could push this, but then he's on his own, and he needs to be defended by something. So maybe like a horse here, or the rook commits to it, or something else intervenes so that the cannon covers it. Okay, but you can't do that everywhere. Eventually the pawn line will trade off. Things will die. The position will open, which will then, as the position opens, make the elephants and horses able to do more. Okay. So we don't have a game feel issue with Xiangqi, even if they owe turns. We don't have a balance issue with Xiangqi, even if they owe turns. We don't have a balance issue with Xiangqi, even if they owe turns for drops being normal. And the best part is if we go, I'm very briefly going to talk about how it works with shogi, how it would work with shogi. I'm just going to drop them down. So shogi reinforcements, for the record, is 1 additional bishop, 1 additional rook. Very short justification for that. Where's the other bishop? God damn it. Force westernized. For all you hooligans. Ignore these. These are the Xiangqi ones. These are the shogi reinforcements. Okay. They only have a bishop on a single color, which against these stronger armies means that they concede a lot of control over the opposite color by virtue of having had to have done that. This way you can at least do this, and you control more of the dark squares in time. Shogi owing a move because they aren't able to do it directly. Yeah, that does kind of suck, but it's 2 turns of tempo at maximum, and we can balance around that. Furthermore, Xiangqi, doing this in 1 turn versus 2 turns, this one feels more natural. And that is a very common drop, by the way. Second, Shogi starts the game with 4 hanging pawns that they have to protect in the opening. So if they do something like this, that means they can no longer do ranging rook ideas. But with the rook in hand, they are able to still create those types of scenarios where they're able to make those tactics that exist in their joseki. Uh, Japanese word for opening theory, loosely. The exact definition is a known position where both sides end up equal after a series of moves in a turn-based game. That is joseki. But it's really opening theory for shogi purposes. For Go, which is the other game that has joseki, joseki refers to the corner, and fuseki is like whole board stuff. That also means that a known sequence can happen in shogi that is a joseki that is just part of one area of the board, while another joseki, which is a known sequence of moves that results in a relatively even position on another area of the board, and then the big picture of those two joseki interacting would be a fuseki in shogi as well. Okay. And by having a rook reinforcement, we make those types of joseki where the rook is over here normally, immediately, more possible, despite the fact that shogi owes moves for the generals moving forward. Okay. And this, getting 2 pieces worth of stuff in a single turn in shogi, feels unnatural. But for shogi purposes, because drops are already a thing, these being conditional on where they can go barely matters. But doing this in 2 turns where you now put the piece down after you moved something from an open square because you wanted that square to be open, and it kind of just feels like it's a really conditional from hand drop. And it makes sense, and it works for shogi. So this works better for shogi game feel. It works better for total game feel. And we no longer have the Xiangqi issue, which forced us to use Sarah-1 gating for backline reinforcements. So, that is the second major change today. We are, in fact, doing this. But there was another recommendation. So we, technically, in order to fix the first problem, only need all of the reinforcements to have the same rule. But it doesn't have to be gating or drop a single one as turn. We have other options. The main one is the reinforce all button, where when you choose to reinforce, it is a second wave. You drop all of your pieces at once. That doesn't feel as good for shogi, first of all. And it creates possible tactical issues. But let's look at the game psychology version for a moment. It means that you owe fewer moves. It is stronger to drop multiple pieces than a single one. That's just straight facts. Therefore, we can tone back the material a little bit, in theory. So, for example, a drop is relatively likely, especially if you're dropping 2 pieces, to gain you a turn of tempo. It costs you a turn of tempo, so net cost 0 for shogi, which means they kind of started like it was on the board, which makes sense because the action economy of gating was move a piece, place a piece, so 2 pieces are in new positions. For this deploy all rule would be drop a piece, and you only can do it once a game, and it's your only opportunity. So it requires a little bit more setup, but it's still 2 pieces in new spots, and it's 2 completely new pieces. And I think that restriction heavily affects shogi, where you have to do them all at once, in a bad way, which makes me disagree with the crazy idea. It has interesting implications for Xiangqi because it means very much so that we need fewer material reinforcements. And Xiangqi, Morning Calm, already has material questions and issues because of the interactions of the pawn lines and weird things about elephants and horses opening and closing that may not fully work yet. And It's also an unknown quantity. So a single turn to place a piece from hand to some sort of restricted area of the board is something decently understood in chess variant theory. Not super well understood. You have to seek it out, and most of your example comes through shogi and shogi variants. But the concept of placing a chess piece onto the board somewhere as a turn is common. Gating is also a relatively well understood concept thanks to Sarawon chess and other stuff that has taken inspiration from it. Okay. This would be an unknown quantity, and wow, really interesting. Like, it's something that could be this is potentially a battalion gimmick in its own right. I do not think it is worth the risk and the problems, particularly the problems it poses for shogi. It might be equal to this solution for Xiangqi. And it changes nothing for Xiangqi because they only have one reinforcement anyway. So if it's a reinforcement button or if it's a places turn, they do the exact same thing. So there you go. It only took me an hour, 1 minute, and 30 seconds to fully get through describing what Liam and I were working through today, including all of my conclusions on it. That's it. Thank you. Hope you all have a wonderful day. I'm so glad I actually took notes this time because I was much more coherent this time. The irony is not lost on me. Have a good day, have a good night. Sleep well, work well. Peace.